Hi, I'm Hannah,
I'm Henry.
I'm Maya. And I'm Mackenzie.
and we're going to talk about the Nonverbal Communications Project in Science and Culture. I'm going to start with the question. The question was examining whether or not nonverbal communication is important to students taking Go trips. We examined this through case studies, journals, and personal experiences. I'm going to go over the first case study, and that was performed by Mandal, and he wrote the Journal of Human Behavior in the Social Environment. The case study defines nonverbal communication, and it defines this through using signals. There are three elements of a signal. These are the signal itself, what the signal refers to, and the signal interpreter. The signal is a crucial link between sender and receiver. In communication, we also use body language without being aware of it. We constantly perceive and interpret other people's body language, and information is conveyed through twisting hands, body posture, kicking our legs, and facial expressions. In a conversation, time, place, and arrangement may provide cues to the participants as to who is in the system, the possible interaction pattern, and the appropriate and non-appropriate communication content. Nonverbal signs help to regulate the system, cueing hierarchy and priority among communicators, signaling the flow of interaction and providing meta-communication and feedback. Nonverbal communication varies between cultures, and cross-culture similarities and substantial differences in body language exist in the extent of the body language use and interpretation. For example, the head gestures for yes and no are not the same in all cultures, as well as the physical distance kept between people during a conversation. Not only is nonverbal communication a fundamental attribute for people, but it is for animals as well. Now Henry's going to talk about the first peer-reviewed journal.
All right, so for the first peer-reviewed journal that we analyzed, it was a scientific study done to determine the effectiveness of laughter as nonverbal communication for relationship building. So for this study, people were paired up and put in random groups and then placed under certain situations in which laughter would be invoked and observed by the scientists. What the scientists primarily did was monitor the people while they were in these situations and record their reactions and whether or not it appeared as if a relationship was being built based on the laughter that the people were experiencing. Throughout the study, the scientists found that laughter often served to build relationships in a more effective way than dialogue did. And part of the effectiveness of laughter is that it is a global thing. Dialogue is often monocultural, and if your culture does not speak the same language, it can be hard to communicate. But fortunately, nonverbal communications, such as laughter, help to build relationships globally. No matter where you are, these things often can help bring people together. So upon reading this study, we analyzed it to determine whether or not we thought it was a valid study. The study used large sample sizes of over 200 people for better results and to ensure objectivity. This way, the scientists were able to determine that in a large group of people, if most of the participants laughed and built relationships, that the study was in fact genuine. The people were also placed randomly in their groups and put in random situations, again, to improve objectivity and ensure that there was no way to predict what people would be put in which situations. Also, all steps of this project were recorded thoroughly by the scientists so that it could be replicated by any others wishing to reproduce it. This way, if any other scientists wished to test it out themselves with different participants, they would be able to do so easily. Along with this, throughout the experiment, certain variables were changed and the situations were altered, in order to test laughter as a response during different scenarios and to see whether relationships were built during all situations of laughter, as opposed to just a few. So through this, we determined that this was a valid scientific study and showed how effective nonverbal communications can be. For our second peer-reviewed journal, it was a study done by scientists of several business students who were trained in either nonverbal communications or regular business skills. Most of the students taking part in this study were postgraduate business students, and as already mentioned, were either tested under conditions in which they were trained in nonverbal communications or in which they were trained with normal business skills. 2 groups of students were randomly put together from across several universities and were then selected to either be trained in nonverbal communications or the other skills. While one group was trained in specific nonverbal communications on how to, 1, communicate nonverbally, and also how to recognize nonverbal cues, the others were trained in regular business communication skills, such as speech giving and things of that sort. Throughout the study, the scientists found that the students who were trained in nonverbal communications were ultimately far more effective in all tests of communications than the students from other tests. After analyzing this study, we agreed that it was a valid scientific study as it used a large sample size similarly to the last journal, and this allowed for objectivity amongst the results. The students were also randomly placed in their groups and were observed randomly, which allowed for no prediction of what would happen and to allow true objectivity of the results. Along with this, the control group of students were given all of the training except for the nonverbal training, while the experimental group of students were given all training including the nonverbal training. This way, the only difference between the 2 groups of students would be that one group was trained in nonverbal communications while the others weren't. And from this study, the scientists found that those who were trained in nonverbal communications were far more effective at communications, hence proving that if one is trained in nonverbal communications, it'll be easier to recognize those types of communications and also to utilize them. Now we're going to go on and discuss some of our own personal experiences with nonverbal communications. And I'm going to start by discussing how nonverbal communications was used by myself and my sister in Chiang Mai, Thailand. At the age of 7, my family and myself moved to Chiang Mai, Thailand to do missions work. When we first arrived, we didn't speak any Thai language, but were still able to communicate small scale using nonverbal communications, such as things like smiling and laughter. And seeing as Thailand is known as the land of smiles, obviously it's recognized for its ability at nonverbal communications. Our Thai neighbors became good friends with my sister and myself, and despite having absolute no language, we were able to communicate with their children through laughter, smiling, and various forms of nonverbal communication. As we learned the language, we became better friends with these students, and then were able to communicate better with them. But nonverbal communication definitely built the foundation for our relationships with their children, and if we hadn't had these nonverbal communications, we may not have gotten to know them at all, and would have missed out on some great relationships. So while we relied on nonverbal communications for at least a year, we learned the language eventually and then were able to build on these relationships, which showed that nonverbal communications are just as necessary as verbal communications for building relationships. Now Maya is going to talk about her personal experience in the Dominican Republic.
My personal experience was in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. I traveled there with my basketball team here at Cornerstone. We went to a few different places, but one place specifically stood out to me when it came to nonverbal communication. It was one of the orphanages we went to. This orphanage stood out to me because none of us really had a lot of knowledge with speaking Spanish, but we were all still able to talk and relate with the kids because of our nonverbals. We were able to act out or use hand motions to be able to interact and talk with the children. We were able to build positive relationships even though we did not speak the same language. I realize when I am traveling to a different country with a different language, there are still ways to communicate with people and relate to the different people within the country using nonverbal communication. Now Mackenzie is going to talk to us about her experience.
Nonverbal communication is key when traveling. I've traveled internationally before to Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. These are areas where most of the people know English as a second language, and yet nonverbal communication was still a key player in all the communication that took place. Small hand gestures and facial expressions make a huge difference when communicating with people who speak another language. In the near future, I know that nonverbal communication will become a key player again. As in January, I will be traveling to Dubai. For spring break, I will be traveling to Haiti. And in May, for a project that I'm working on for Enactus, I will be traveling to Ecuador. I know with all 3 of these trips, I will be in an area that I do not know geographically, the first language is not English, and there are multiple cultures present. From studying this project and past experiences, I know that I will be using nonverbal communication in order to communicate with the people in these countries. And now Maya is going to discuss our argument.
So with our argument, from our research and personal experiences, we find nonverbal communication training is necessary prior to attending Go trips. Through the case study, we found that nonverbal communication is used by all humans but is different in every culture. And through the second peer-reviewed article, we found that training helps to recognize and utilize nonverbal communication. Overall, referring to the question, we do agree that it is crucial to train on nonverbal communication before attending a Go trip based on our findings.